What what is this, Dr. Carr?
Ah, that was South African firefighters arriving in Canada. I want to say that was this past summer, fighting fighting fires. Canada has a bilateral agreement with the government of South Africa, allowing them, well, they in this specific instance, in terms of their firefighters, they one of the expressions of the bilateral agreement is that they support each other in developing new techniques, sharing technology techniques, and so, and in dire circumstances, even a transfer of labor. So to see those firefighters come in, that's the sixth time they've done that since 2015.
Wow.
Even as Gavin Newsom thanked Claudia Sheinbaum for sending Mexican firefighters. Imagine that across the border. There are no borders when it comes to fire, huh?
Yeah, so you mean instead of like pointing fingers and blaming people, folk just showed up to take care of the people who need the help instead of
I knew that would put a smile on your face for
yeah.
that very reason. You know what I'm saying? That's a beautiful thing. Nobody cares what color you are when they fight in a fire trying to save your life or your house. I mean, isn't that something? Isn't that something? Uh,
And it doesn't seem like it's so hard
it's not hard at all.
to show up. And they were showing up with joy.
Well, see, that's the beautiful thing about culture too. Even as we, I was talking to somebody yesterday about this whole fight they fighting over where hip hop started. I said it started in Africa. Stop that beef. And but to see those continental Africans connecting with their culture. I mean, like I said many times, and when we go to South Africa, it really strikes you. The South Africans, all of them, Zulu, Swana, Sotho, Ndebele, any of them, they they don't do anything without the cultural grounding. Think about the fight of fire, and they in there, I mean, singing there, and they got a firefighter song. That was a fire that blew. I'm like, seriously. I mean, it's beautiful and joyful in going into a tragedy. I mean, first of all, I know you checked on all the California fam. I know they've been calling in, and
Yeah.
you know, anything you want to say about that as we
I mean, it's beyond thoughts and prayers, which is what we lean to,
sure.
and then blame and disease
Hmm.
when because we feel helpless. Because really, this is a nation of cowards, and I'm gonna say it the way it is. Folk who have learned helplessness, and I'm not talking about the people who are listening to us. I'm not talking about us, but the grounding in this country, it leans towards that because the true power is we have no control over nature, and if these fires were set, that's something else, but the 100-mile-an-hour winds, I was talking to a friend of mine last night who's had to evacuate his home because there's no power and the fires are very close. And he said 100-mile-an-hour winds. I mean, think about 100-mile-an-hour winds with no rain, right? Those are hurricane conditions. That's a category 5 hurricane wind.
That's right.
So the wind is going to take that blaze wherever it wants to. And if your house didn't get set on fire, you're not set apart by God. There's nothing, like
No,
people are always looking for meaning in things, and sometimes it just is what it is. And
it's the word.
what I've been encouraged by is seeing people like Milo Ventimiglia, I can't pronounce his name, from This Is Us, who lost his house, but he's out there helping other people.
Mm,
And his character on This Is Us actually died in a fire, and he lost everything. But his
mm,
optimism, Gina Yashere was like, okay, I needed to declutter. So now I was forced to, even though I lost all of these things, I'm alive. I'm encouraged by the people who have found, a silver lining in this, because there really isn't anything you can do about it at this point. And the
right.
pointing of fingers, and as if somebody would want this to happen, or
Well,
maybe somebody would want this to happen.
absolutely,
That's
there are
about it.
there are people there are people who want it to happen, and there are people, and I guess a lot of us, like everything that's right in front of us, we become a little bit more knowledgeable about it than we would have otherwise. And of course, we see now, for folks who didn't know, that many of those fires that are set are intentional for warmth because there's so many unhoused people in that region of the country. So it's not like they intended to set fire to the world, but I'm just trying to stay warm because I don't have any place to live. Even as the one of the heirs to the Levi Strauss fortune takes over the city of San Francisco and says he's going to fight homelessness. Yeah, let's see how you do that, because I'm not sure that you're not doing it on behalf of those tech folk you want to lure back into the city. This is what happens. This is the things we can control. As you say, there are things we can't. But that selflessness, and I've heard you've been saying this, over the airwaves, of course, these last few days. Fire doesn't recognize wealth. It doesn't recognize ethnicity. It doesn't recognize, saw a photograph of Robert Smith's house out there in Malibu burned to the ground. It's like, man, your billions can't protect you. And those who are looking for blame, and shout out to all the racists, because I really do appreciate them, because like fire purifies, racism clarifies. And
Mm.
y'all mad at Karen Bass because she was in Africa, she was in Ghana. Guess what? I hope you get so angry that your body literally can't compensate for the rage, and perhaps then we can move one step closer to having some human beings who can listen to reason. um and at that point, you want to talk these
I
folks.
mean, so like, if she didn't go to Africa, it wouldn't have happened. Like,
Right.
I need the rationale.
Because you're a rational human being. That's not to be confused with these people. And the ideologues, little Anna and her friend, little Chink, Chink hanging out with Charlie Kirk at Turning Point and all this kind of thing, and Anna raging at Karen Bass and saying our taxes are so high. Well, people are looking to evade taxes every day in your income bracket, little Anna, and they're not doing it because they think that it's a public good where their dollars are going. They're doing it because they want to keep their money. And y'all could be mad at Karen Bass as you want. And I don't believe in thinly veiled racism. Say it with your bird chests. Say it with your bird chest, because you can guarantee that the next billionaire who runs for mayor of Los Angeles, and they're teeing up now, is gonna hang this over Karen Bass's head like a Hawaiian lei. And they're gonna blame her. And but you're gonna get what you want. You're going to get what you want. There's a reason why science fiction writers, again, going back to, when you were talking last week, there's a reason why science fiction authors since the end of the World War have been writing about dystopia, because it's inevitable. Because dystopia comes from inequity, comes from inequality. Eventually, so many people have been deprived of so much that they eventually say, I have nothing to lose. And it's not going to be a natural fire. They're going to set fire to you. You understand? So y'all keep doing this, but
I mean, so no one reads history. It's like,
no one.
no one reads history. Oh,
Mm.
or the arrogance that it won't happen to you.
Yeah,
Oh,
that is going to happen to you.
that's them.
Yeah,
We have stopgap measures now.
right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, and yeah, I mean, it's interesting because again, even as the governor of California was thanking the president of Mexico for sending, what I can only imagine as this thing continues, might just be the first wave of firefighters from Mexico to come into the area. We go back a few years to the president of the United States, then president of the United States, about to be the return president of the United States. And by the way, we do unconditional discharge every day. Nobody should be mad about that. It's called going to the bathroom. So if anything, it's poetic justice that Donald Trump would now be unconditional discharge because there's another word for that. One's a 4-letter word, starts with S and stops with T. But remember when he was out there walking around with the governor and saying, why don't we just get some rakes and clean up the floor? Okay, fool. This is the whole point. The point is that human influenced global warming and climate change has created a condition where the forest, where fire is very natural and necessary. But now you've got, because of the weather patterns that have changed, you've got all this additional stuff on the floor. You've got all these additional species who can't be regulated by other species because they're not there to eat them or to kill them. And so they're burrowing into the trees, and the trees are turning into dead trees, which creates more fuel for the fire. Anybody thinks there's not a connection? I saw him dragging Bernie Sanders for filth this week because he brought up global warming and said, yeah, no, he's not wrong. He actually reads, he actually studies. And
There's 80. There's two things, right? There's some folk that need to, pass the torch or light the torch. But I think we also need to respect somebody that has lived on this earth long enough to have seen things come back.
right.
That there is something to be said for that wisdom, and this nation seems to have little respect for that.
Absolutely. They do. It does. And so, I mean, and again, we were talking before we came on. And I know that it is difficult to be in conversation all the time. And because we want silence, we need silence. We need that, as we've talked about several times, the power to pause. I also know that without that, it's difficult to do that deep thinking and reflection and study, which is why it's interesting to see how my friend and comrade Gerald Horn has just jumped with both feet into this social media and broadcast and YouTube and platform world, because he's everywhere all the time. And even as he continues to work, it's really an inspiration. I was watching you in conversation just for a few minutes. It was just a few minutes. I know you had to go. Michael Steele's podcast, Mike Steele, I guess that clip of him arguing with Brzezinski's son-in-law and daughter on MSNBC. Yeah, I don't know, but anyway, but you and Roland and Tim Miller in conversation for a moment with Michael Steele. And for me, it was interesting to listen to that conversation, because we are at a moment when doing something requires something more than just kind of having a hot take. And in those comments that you made about starting with the thing right in front of you, talking with our brother Ras Baraka, even beyond that, starting with the block, starting with the community, and doing, and at the same time being cognizant of and helping us understand the connection between that and the national, the local, as Miller brought up Joe Biden and saying he's pretty good at, being on the shop floor and being in the community, but he couldn't mess it. And then Roland saying, yeah, but the Democrats are fighting one fight and the Republicans are fighting another fight, and the Democrats simply won't fight like they fight. You need to go and have a fight. All of that coming to a head in this moment when we are on the verge, as the point you made, of decision making that could lead to, and you didn't use this word, but I'm using it here, the potential extinction of the species. This guy's getting ready to get sworn in. He's gonna have the nuclear codes while he's talking about taking over Panama and Canada and Mexico.
And Greenland.
And Greenland. He was gonna take Greenland, right? And people, I mentioned this this week on Urban View, Lamont, we're talking, and a lot of people might not know. We know that the population of Greenland, the largest island in the world, is sparse.
56,000.
56,000, but over 3/4 of those people are Inuit.
Yes.
Meaning they're indigenous people, so the idea of them wanting independence really isn't that far-fetched. So while the Canadian politicians are saying, well, hey, Oregon, Washington State, California, why don't y'all come to Canada? The Inuit, if you ask them in Greenland, what do you want? They say, what do you mean? We only speak the same language that these white people speak in Denmark. So let's be clear. But we do like this healthcare. We do like this, and we don't want to be part of the United States if it means subjecting ourselves to the healthcare system.
And they're 100% literate.
100%.
Unlike the United States. Why the hell would they want this mess?
Yeah. And even as the new ambassador to Denmark, junior unconditional discharge, was out there, Donald Trump Jr., out there sniffing around with that beard, trying to mask his chinless skull and trying to make an argument that everybody there wants to be part of the United States. This is the concept. This goes back to the concept of Pax Americana. I mean, an American peace, which draws on the metaphor of the Pax Britannia, the British peace, the British Empire. The sun never sets on the British Empire, which draws on Pax Romana, the Roman Empire. Nothing ever, the sun never sets on the Roman empires. They try to take over the world. And, did you watch Gladiator 2?
Yes, I did. Before I do, I just want to say, sitting with Michael Steele, I realized how I never want to be on a panel ever again.
You sound like Angie Porter. If you say panel to Professor Porter, she says no.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't done it in so long. I was under contract at MSNBC 100 years ago, and before that, CNN. And what I've realized the last 10 years of being on Urban View is what we do is not that. We actually have conversations that hopefully lead to change in people's lives, but also in places. There is an edict. There is a purpose. Like I enjoy, even yesterday, Friday with Roderick Morrow, we touched all of the topics and we left with a sense of joy even in the midst of all of the trauma that's going on, there is no place to go when you're having these circular conversations that don't lead to anything. So when I came in, immediately I had this like, oh, why am I here? I don't want to have this kind of I'm not going to ever be in a barbershop having a conversation. I'll be
Mm.
outside the barbershop building whatever needs to go next door. Like that's what I would do. But I'm grateful that he invited me. I think Michael Steele is a stand-up guy. But I just realized in that moment, I was like, I'm glad I have to go early, but also this ain't my ministry to sit here and pontificate with folk that we're really not building anything. I want to know that something's going to happen after this conversation. But
Mm.
that was a light bulb moment, and I was like, and that's why I don't do television.
Don't
Thank
do
you.
it. Don't
Okay.
you tell me.
Note to self, because
You
I
know,
was like, yeah. Oh, you should do no. Yeah, this is on purpose. You don't see me out there on purpose. You see me here with you because at least here there's a goal to educate. There's a goal to look back, to move forward. There's a goal to inspire, to motivate. There is a goal when we come together. Any place we come together. So I'm grateful and thank you for
no,
being
no,
here.
thank you.
All
Thank
right,
you. It's it it's the continuing tension is there. The tension between thinking, reflection, and being in conversation, which leads to community. It can be very frustrating. It is very frustrating. Um, as you say, we have established a foundation, are building on that growing, explosive foundation in dialogue in this space, in the narrative space, in the Nubia space, that affords us a measure of tilting that balancing act in the direction of thoughtfulness. That's what education should do, as we know that. And at the same time, we live in a world where that fight over control is increasingly shaped by disinformation, propaganda that has a purpose. Got to keep you divided, got to keep you distracted, got to keep you looking away from and acting in concert with the way that we think about the world. Who is that? We, an increasingly small number of human beings who mistake material control for control. And so we find ourselves now with the idea, okay, well, we've talked about it. What are we going to do about it? And that kind of sometimes, I think, often obscures the fact that talking about it is doing something. It's a form of doing but it has to be fed increasingly by being much more aware, being much more educated, and that changes the dialogue. So yeah, I'll be the first to confess, to acknowledge, rather, confess is not the right word, I think. I'll be the first to acknowledge that I can hear something in just about anything. But
yes.
that's because because I'm constantly thinking about stuff and reading and studying. And now I also understand that that comes at a cost, and that's the factor I think that where you would find, I would find frustration, and that is when you've thought about a thing, you've sat with a thing, and you're in dialogue, and you realize, okay, I could pick something out of here, but is it worth the investiture in time? Because time is a finite
That
resource.
is it.
You know what I'm saying? Do I need to spend
Yeah,
this
listen,
time here, or should I be?
every day I'm like, the time that we have on this earth is so precious, which is
Mm.
why even spending it, as people are losing their lives, 5 people lost their lives in California, countless people have lost their homes and everything. And we're not talking about the house. We're talking about pictures, baby pictures, family mementos, things that are valuable only to that person, right? And if anybody's ever had a fire and lost everything, you know what that feels like. And it doesn't happen to all of us. But even if we look in our homes, the things that are most precious aren't the things that may cost money. It's the stuff you can't replace, like the picture of my daddy and my granddaddy that sits over
Mm.
my shoulder. It's like if
Mm.
that's gone forever, and I'm never replacing that. I can never replace it.
Yeah.
But here we are. Like I don't want to have circle jerk conversations that lead nowhere. We have little time, and we have a short window with this thing that's coming in on the 20th to actually build something that lasts generations after we're gone. And if we don't do it now, we're going to be right back here 50 years from now having the same conversation. We won't be here, but the next iteration, and maybe people will be able to monetize that, because that's really what it's about, right? Monetization of things. But I'm going to say less about it. All
No,
right.
That's that's key. That's
I
key.
mean, but, and let me just say this too, because I understand the need to make money, and we both, taught, and for both of us, and I know this for a fact, we're not driven by money.
Oh,
So
absolutely.
it makes it difficult, for people to understand what this is, because it's like you can't dangle no money in front of either one of us and
No,
get us
no,
to do anything.
no.
But we also have a foundation, like of long as our needs are met, we're good, and then we can move out accordingly. And there's no quest to get more and more and more and more and more,
That's
you
right.
know. So it's a little bit interesting watching people put together platforms because they see the monetary gain, and and they're doing more of that because it's more money. It's like, but is this necessary?
What does this have to be? And you've been very not only thoughtful but resourceful in translating that vision and that memory to action in the form of the narrative platform and in Nubia. And as I was listening to you all in conversation, and Roland brought up Isaac Hayes the third and fan base, and the fact that people can invest in that, as Mark Zuckerberg goes increasingly MAGA to try to match Jeff Bezos and certainly Elon Musk, the value, the real value of this space becomes increasingly apparent. And Ron's been saying this about his network, Black Star Network and apps, of course, and that's true too. I think about this space, and I think about even the visual of people coming together. There will come, and there has already come, but there will increasingly come a day when a guy like Mike Steele is like, I gotta come over here because I can't. They're gonna put me YouTube. Wait, what the hell? Wait. Alphabet. Wait, Meta owns Instagram. Yeah, and if we listen to the oral arguments yesterday in Washington, which are some of them are included on the front page of today's papers, listening to the Supreme Court, looks like there's a strong likelihood they're gonna uphold this TikTok ban. At which point, all of the children and many of the adults are going to lose their minds and come running. What must we do to be safe? Now, you come on over here, but don't bring them cat videos and that dancing show because this, but it's
No, no,
coming.
or don't come. I mean, like,
It won't come.
shit,
Right.
you don't have to be here. I had a beautiful conversation with Kat Adams. We're gonna get to Gladiator too. Don't
Oh, no,
worry.
that's fine. I'm
Gladiator's coming. But
and
yeah,
I'm gonna see Cat next week. I'm being Claflin. Those
oh
of
my
y'all
God, so
might put it in
brilliant.
the chat. Yeah, I'll
But
be
the need to tell our own story. She is
mm-hmm,
a master at
a
teaching
master. A
people how to reclaim their ancestors' stories. And I'm so excited because it's something that, that's again a precious thing that you can't put a price on, to be able to tell the story of your family or how to interview your elders and how to, get the stories from them that will then tell the story of your family's existence. I think, I'm excited about that when it comes. So I'm just,
I am too.
as we
I
as
am too.
we build on something that just was not even a figment of either one of our imaginations 5 years ago. Here
Nothing
we
close.
are.
Nothing close. Wouldn't even have thought about it. And again, I mean, we're coming up on our next anniversary in a couple of months. Here we are, 2025. That'll be 5 years, and just thinking about the possibilities. And as you say, I mean, this is something that neither one of us was thinking about. None of us were thinking about, and yet it is built out of what all of us have been thinking about all our lives, and all the people who came before us, and all the people who came before us. It is quite sobering to recognize that when people say a phrase that seems kind of cliche, we are who we've been looking for, or we're all we need. To see that demonstrated in real time just is really an affirmation. We are. We are everything we need as a group, as a species. We can do this. And in fact, we're going to be forced to make some decisions. These fires remind us that there are things out of our control and there are things that we can control. And those are two different things, but they overlap. And
But the one thing that I think that has come out of this, for me at least, is the need for community, the need to be with people who care about people. And even with these fires, if you have community, You know, that they tried to say Black people were looting, but it was really Black people helping Black people move Black people stuff out of Black people's house.
Of
You know,
course.
taking a picture like they were saying that the Haitians were eating, you know, animals, and they're showing a picture of an animal control person moving a bird, but
Come
that's
on,
a Black person eating animals. Like
come on.
we're the fight that we're in right now is so crucial that we at least tell the truth to one another and then stop the lies wherever we see it, because none of these platforms are going to fact check. So
No,
we have to be pristine and not let people, even if it looks like it is, don't spread that. Don't spread it. Don't comment on it. Don't spread it, and check the people that are doing it.
that's right. That's right. Oh, that's very powerful. Yeah, we have an obligation to do that. That is something we can do.
That's our
Right. I mean, yeah,
that's our family. You know, you
that's
let
right.
people talk about your mama in public, basically.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
but that only happens if we're a we.
Yes. That's well, there we go. And we
You
know
can't
that we're
talk
not.
about you ain't gonna talk about my mama. I don't know. You're not gonna talk about my brother. No, you will
Right.
not.
That's
Not on
right.
my watch. So yeah,
That's exactly what it
that
is.
is important too. You know, because there are whole groups that won't let you talk about them.
No
Why
question.
why aren't we one of those groups?
Well, because there's no we. We fighting over the Bronx versus Puerto Rico. Because we've been taught by our masters. And I don't say that lightly. I mean, if people don't like me when I say that you love your master, then stop treating people like your master, and then I'll stop saying it. But as long as you are treating folks like they're your master, then I'm gonna say your master, you love your master, and because your master wants you fighting each other. And I I would agree with what Roland said. While Hakeem Jeffries is talking about we're better than this, and we're going to work together and put down the hammer and pick up the plowshare. The MAGA Muppet, who looks straight like Ernie from Sesame Street, Mike Johnson, is like, I'm gonna take that plowshare, as Mike Steele says, shove it up your behind. So let's be very clear about the fact that we're not talking about the same thing. And I for one, I don't want to fight anybody. At the same time, you're not gonna beat me up. So let's be very clear, because to quote Walt Whitman, we are large, we contain multitudes. And if a MAGA clown who's deeply wounded humanity has him, shrieking his little racist bleat, his dying bleat of a dying way of life in the world, the idea that we would somehow conform to that by attacking each other is absurd on his face. We'll end up saving you too if you can be saved, but your salvation is not my concern, sir, because you got our people in your gun sights, and we're gonna take that gun from you. That's what we're gonna do. Because you read your little funky Bible verse, and you might understand you got to take those swords and beat them into plowshares. There's some violence involved. Anyway, I'm not gonna do that because there. But yeah, so I mean, it's an exciting time.
Yeah.
Sad but exciting. Sad but exciting. Sad but
You
exciting.
brought up Gladiator 2 for a reason.
Yeah. What did you think of it?
I thought Denzel was amazing.
Oh yeah, he definitely was. He
No, I
definitely
mean, but if you think about Empire, I just had this beautiful conversation with Reverend Dr. Frederick Haynes, Frederick
Yes,
Douglass
brother.
Haynes the third.
Yeah.
We're studying the book of Revelation, and but
Mm,
not really. And he said something really powerful, that that book is kind of like code switching for Black folk. Like it is written against the empire. It's the empire that is being written about, and it's the oppressed that will have its day. And I was like, if you read that from that perspective, we're in those times, whether it's Rome or the United States or whomever, USSR. So looking at Gladiator 2, you had Denzel, and I don't even know the name. I just like, that's Denzel.
right,
And
right, right.
and the leaders who are feckless, reckless, uh, deformed, mentally immoral, amoral, and Denzel's the one that's actually wielding the power, right?
Yeah, yeah. Who knew how to get it? Who came out of
The dirt,
captivity?
yes.
Yeah, he left it.
I was
Left.
rooting for him, and I know that was wrong. The way they had it written, I'm not supposed to root for him to win, but I was.
I mean, what do you do when you start talking about empire or kingdoms, including, for me at least, the kingdom of God? The idea that we want to replace your empire with our empire, because we want, I mean, this is the whole concept of Pax Romana, Pax Britannica, Pax Americana that Donald Trump has in his warped brain. The idea that
Wait,
we
and pox or pax means peace, right?
peace, Pax is peace.
So it's an oxymoron when you put pox in front of
Well,
empire. Isn't it
unless
like a warring empire? You're gonna put peace in front of that?
well, I mean, what happens when you start talking about taking your agency and putting it in the hands of a symbol for the way you view the world? Because there is, after all, discussions of a prince of peace. I mean, the idea of peace has to be, imposed. The idea that peace would have to be imposed on someone. This is the challenge. I mean, this is why, Hakeem Jeffries can stand next to the MAGA Muppet at a pro. How should I put this? It was marketed as a pro-Israel rally, but really pro-Zionist rally in Washington D.C. And because the MAGA Muppet is standing there thinking that these people had to be exterminated in order for the peace to come. He's reading from the same book, but he's reading it very differently. So people are saying we have to stand with Israel. Yeah, because you hate you hate the Jews. If you want to talk about anti-Semites, just go find you some deep conservative racist Christians who say that we support Israel because that has to happen in order for the real peace to come. Yeah, but it's got to be a bloody peace. This is what Margaret Walker in For My People, a bloody peace. Margaret Walker writes in that poem about a bloody peace written in the sky. So even Christians, like the Christian soldier, Samuel Alito, who talked with Donald Trump this week, claiming it was about an intern, but nobody calls a Supreme Court justice for a reference who's about to go to the White House calls a Supreme Court justice about an internship or a job for a former clerk. That's not what happens. We know what you did. Say it with your bird chest. Yeah, you could call Sam Alito a fundamentalist Christian, but I think he's not even like what was the character in Conclave? Tedesco. He's not a conservative Christian like that. No, this guy is a racist. He's a global white supremacist. His concept of Christianity requires a sword and ramming it down your throat in the name of his God. So bring peace. So peace for them, Pax peace for them. That's why it becomes important to connect it with the concept it's been connected to over the last couple of thousand years. Pax Americana, meaning American peace. We know best. Even Jimmy Carter, the only human rights first occupant of the White House, who, as we talked about last week, demonstrates the limits of that philosophy. Kai Bird, who I was mentioning last week, his book, The Outlier on Carter. Like I said, to me, that's the best Carter book I've read. But of course, I failed to mention in passing that Kai Bird, of course, wrote Oppenheimer. He wrote the book that the movie Oppenheimer was based on. That's why some people who don't know him, you can at least make that connection. But he made that point. He's been interviewed many times, of course, over the last week, 10 days or so. And he makes the point that Carter was really kind of like a minister in the presidency, but he's on top of Pax Americana. In other words, the limits mean, you might have human rights as your instinct. You might have peace as your instinct, peace as your personal way of life, but you're the president of the United States. And I want to thank everybody in all the ongoing conversation that folks took the time to filter through your fingers or through the speech function in both YouTube and Knarrative, and to the conversation. Thanks, Russ Smith, particularly for taking the time in the ongoing dialogue we have in Nubia under the in class for that week. Thank you for doing that, Russ, and then coming in on Monday night and being in dialogue. Because when I was talking about Jimmy Carter last week here, and as I've talked about him since his transition on the 29th of last year, the month 29th of December 2024, I tend to use narratives as points of entry for larger conversations. And I want to thank everybody who came in, some a little bit hastily, I think, because they weren't paying. I choose my words very carefully in writing and in speech when I said the possibilities and limits of the American presidency. But those who came in and reminded folks who may not have been aware of the Carter administration's actions in Central America, Think about the Contras, of course, uh, their actions in Angola. So while you see them pushing for the independence of Rhodesia, which becomes Zimbabwe in 1980, you also see an investment of resources in Jonas Savimbi and Unita in Angola. Of course, East Timor, the tragedies, the mass murder in East Timor. You see the Carter administration involved in that as well. So it was a very important reminder of what I was very clear about putting at the center of what we talked about last week. And so thank you for those specific examples of the limits and limitations. And also of a reminder of why it is important to really study TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, all those things. Set them aside. Turn that ish off. Pick up not just one book, but many books. Spend some time. Turn the computer back on to ask questions, to find sources that you then turn off the computer to consult. Or if you keep the computer on, you now know what you can see and pick and what you can put in conversation with each other. Because I see, for example, on TikTok and other social media platforms, the video that started our conversation today of those firefighters from South Africa being labeled them coming to fight in California. I said, no, they're not. No, that's an old video of these South African firefighters coming into Canada because of a bilateral agreement between Canada and South Africa, which allows us to reveal the underlying point, which is bilateral agreement between two countries, both of whom are in the gun sights of the United States of America, the hillbilly horde. While Jimmy Carter was being funeralized at the National Cathedral this week, the hillbilly horde was in the House of Representatives passing a resolution to condemn the International Criminal Court for its elevating the killers of the Israeli Defense Force and their leader, Bibi Netanyahu, to potential war criminal status for war crimes. Of course, this will have no impact on the ICC, but the hillbilly horde has their priorities straight. While houses are burning in California, they're after the ICC and transgender bathrooms. MAGA, Muppet Mike Johnson. The point I'm trying to make is that that video is a point of entry that a few little bits of research can reveal isn't the South Africans coming to California. However, it is an affirmation that when we face a threat to our common humanity, cooperation is the way that we should go. Connection is the way that we should go. And Pax Americana doesn't exist. Pax Americana doesn't exist. I'm sorry, you orange clown and your orange clown son. Both of you examples of discharge that is unconditional. There are no conditions on discharge that can't be stopped. We all experience that every morning. But there is no Pax Americana. What there is a desire to connect through human community. And you can do that even in the form of doing it between these artificially contrived places we call countries or nations or states. Distinctions with a difference, but I'm not going to labor on that now. We talked about that many times, but there's ways to do it. That video, in other words, shouldn't be bandied about as the South Africans coming to help in California, although I'm sure they would if there were a similar bilateral agreement that was triggered. It is, however, a point of entry once we understand what it is for a much deeper conversation. The deeper conversation about human community, the deeper conversation about connection, the deeper conversation about what we can do when we work together. As we said a couple of weeks ago, doing things together comes naturally. And that requires a deep, full body, full mind, full soul political struggle. When we live in formations, political, economic, social formations, even cultural formations that prevent that type of cooperation, which is why I said what I said last week about the limits and possibilities of the presidency and looking at Jimmy Carter. I did find my copy. It's funny how I put things up, and then, like I said, the vast majority of things. And again, watching those fires, I'm cringing because, all of, my books and papers and materials and journal articles and clip newspapers and all that stuff is in storage, with the exception of this little handful here in these few rooms here, which looks like a lot to you put in context of the corpus. So it's cringing because you realize that everything that we walk on, have, wear, all of that stuff is fuel for fire. And ultimately, when the sun finally busts, the whole thing gonna be burned up. So, none of us will be here for that. Or there are spiritual traditions, ways of knowing that believe that all of us have always been here. So it's just gonna reset. And the only thing changes is the context. But that having been said, I was moving some stuff around. I was looking for something else, and this little slim volume did appear. There's James Earl Carter writing this book. And like I said, this is an autograph copy right here. Jimmy Carter, Always a Reckoning. This is his book of poetry. He wrote this fairly early on in his writing career, post-presidential writing career. This is the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9th book of what eventually became 32 or 33 books. And it as I mentioned last week, just a couple more things on Carter. Again, thank you all, and please continue, because as we say every time we're together in office hours in Nubia on Monday nights, 8 to 10 Eastern time, when the thousands convene in that largest class, largest office hours in the world that I'm aware of in real time, when we come together, what we say to each other, with the Kikongo word Mbongi being invoked, Mbongi, Mbongi, which means a house without rooms, a place in which privacy has no room. What you think belongs to you, what you say belongs to us, and that's an Mbongi. So when we are writing in the Mbongi, speaking in the Mbongi, and what is conventionally called in the technology the chat, it's part of a conversation. And again, I'm grateful to that, because and that extends on Saturdays into these YouTube streets as well, which we don't own, we don't control. It's not our platform, but we got one we own and we control. That's Knarrative, and that's Nubia. Increasingly important as so we can avoid being zucked. We're zucked. Nah, we're not zucked. We got a place. We got places. But as I mentioned last week, and I wasn't quoting it verbatim, the poem that Carter wrote called Plains. Pioneering white men fought to claim the land of Indians they sent west to die. Our families moved in then to occupy the rolling plains that gave the town its name. There were only 500,000 souls, white and black, the master and the slave. Neither side forgot, nor ever gave each other ways to reach their common goals. But now, as equals, free to rise or fall together, we have learned we must depend on one another. Though the town is small, we cherish it as haven, home, and friend, and won't let strife or mischance bring to all our dreams, our modest, tempered dreams, an end. It's an interesting poem, isn't it? The criminal enterprise called United States of America and the criminal enterprise called Plains, Georgia, created and born in blood. To every birth its blood. Let a bloody peace be written in the sky. It's peaceful because you sent everybody, in the words of James Earl Carter, pioneering white men fought to claim the land of Indians they sent west to die. Can't escape that. Now, what do you do in the aftermath? Because the descendants of many of those indigenous people out there in Oklahoma, this Trail of Tears we're talking about, the descendants of them are in our bloodlines. My mother's father, Creek Indian, great-grandfather on my mother's side, as I stood over her grave last weekend there in Alabama. We here now. What are we going to do? And how does the momentum of memory shape what we do? James Earl Carter is like, we have to get, he says, neither side forgot nor ever gave each other ways to reach their common goals. And so Carter, raised in a county, as Andrew Young reminded everybody in the homily at the National Cathedral, to which, if that was my father in that box, Donald J. Trump wouldn't be in Washington, D.C., much less sitting up in front of him. But that's been talked about quite enough. The theatrics, it was like those some people in both these places, in these chats, both these spaces and boggy spaces, who remember when the big sport in the 1970s was watching the Politburo, whenever they would convene for a state funeral in Russia, in the Soviet Union, 1960s and 70s, scrutinizing the faces, looking at Brezhnev, looking at Boris Yeltsin, looking in the wake of the passing of Stalin, or who's there and who's not there. So this thing is looking at people at a funeral, U.S. presidents not new. But as Reverend Andrew Young, who himself embodies the possibilities and limits of political power in this country, because as Hosea Williams told Jane Baldwin in that documentary, Heard It Through the Grapevine, Dr. King's dream in many ways has been betrayed by his own lieutenants in the increasingly class separate mecca of Atlanta. As Andrew Young sat there next to Jimmy Carter's bodily remains in the casket and said that Plains, Georgia was, for all intents and purposes, 3/4 black. And he grew up around all these black people. And he brought that sensibility to the White House. That's absolutely true. But at the same time, we don't forget. See, I'm from the South, like Jimmy Carter. My mom's from the deeper South, not far from Plains, across the state line of Alabama. And when they sing in the South, oh, I wish I were in the land of cotton. Old times there are not forgotten. Look away. That's a hymn in the South, baby. And I hum it sometimes in them old bookstores as I'm looking at old Civil War books, and I find myself humming, oh, I wish I, because I'm in the land of cotton right now. Old times there are not forgotten. But the question is, how are you narrating those old times? You see? Jimmy Carter understood. And again, thinking about prior to your conversation with Tim and Roland and Mike Steele, brief though it was, I thought it was very interesting in this context to understand that, as Roland was saying, you have to fight to get power, and then you use power for what you want it to be. And as Kyle Bird would say about Jimmy Carter, he was hella ambitious, hella smart, also had this moral anchor, and he understood you can't use government to benefit people if you didn't win the election, which is what Roland was saying. You got to win. Democrats don't know how to win. They talking about common agenda and common humanity and working together. Dumb people on the other side don't believe in that. They believe in white supremacy. They believe in Pax white supremacy. Peace through our whiteness. Peace through our control. We will decide. In a minute, I'm going to tie some of this together again, because I think, it's amazing, isn't it, how these attention spans all of a sudden burst, how it was all about Genocide Joe and Cop Mala and all that stuff when the election was going on, and now the election is over. Somehow, magically, the Palestinians have disappeared from the front page of all the newspapers and all the leading stories.
And eggs and milk.
How about that? Gone. I mean, are you serious right now? I'm saying, and this has disappeared too. Even as it's now in stage 3, which is the boot camp. While we're here right now, the boot camp has already started. That's the third prong of the 4 prongs of Project 2025. First prong, this. Second prong, get the database. All the people going to replace the people in the government. Third prong, the boot camp, where you train those people on what you're going to do. And on the 20th of January, the 4th prong. We done forgot. Oh my God. Oh my God. In that process, and Professor Porter sent me a message about our friend, our colleague, Catherine Frankie at Columbia University. This sister, good sister, Catherine Frankie, who wrote the book Repair, which I have my students at Howard Law School read most semesters. We'll be reading again this year, which is about reparations and the case studies of what Black people did when left alone in South Carolina in 1862, 3, 4. And I'm going to talk about some of that, I'm sure, with Kathy as we down at Claflin next weekend. And in Mississippi, at the plantation once owned by Jefferson Davis's brother. That book, Catherine Frankie, talks about, the war and how Black people took advantage of now fighting through and getting their liberation for themselves before they were betrayed by the federal government to build and be self-determining. And that ethos still echoes through those places to this day. That having been said, Professor Frankie resigned. Well, no, she didn't resign. As she wrote in her letter that Angie was circulated among others. Professor Frankie this week announced that, no, I didn't retire from Columbia, because she was very she's very pro-human rights, and that included defending the rights of Palestinians to be able to do this. You can breathe when you're alive. A lot of unalived Palestinians because of the killers of the Israeli Defense Force, and who spilled over into Lebanon, who spilled over into everywhere, the Golan Heights, Syria. I mean, those killers are buck wild. So Hillbilly Horde passes. Many, please, with your little bird chest, please pass. Even during a funeral, please pass your Hillbilly Horde resolutions against the International Criminal Court, which has its own contradictions. But let's be very clear about this. You can pass them. Please pass them, because it makes it much easier for us to identify who we are for and who we are against. And right now, you are opposite of our common humanity, and that's just fine. I'm not Jimmy Carter, my friend. Anyway, Professor Frankie was retired from Columbia this week. She says, it wasn't my choice not to teach there anymore. Wasn't my choice not to engage in faculty governance anymore. But they turned on me, the president of Columbia, the board of trustees, members of the board of trustees turned on me because I dare protect the rights of students who were protesting. And so this professor is a professor of law at Columbia University, distinguished scholar, full-bred activist, and they made her walk the plank. Fortunately, we've jailbroken the university, black, white, or polka dot, and this ain't that. We, in other words, are already in the space that everybody's going to be rushing to once they realize that all of that stuff is unsustainable, particularly the stuff that it suborns fascism. But, thinking about the limits and the possibilities of any attempt to impose something on other people is one of the things that we spend our time here doing, even and then trying to translate that into action. So I'm going to finish up with Jimmy Carter here for a moment. One more poem. I thought this was interesting because Carter, who wrote this book, who published this book, I don't know, some of these poems were older than others, about his mother, his father, in 1995. So 95, 05, 15, this would mark 30 years ago this year, his book was published. This is his poem entitled, "A Committee of Scholars Describe the Future Without Me." See, for me, I'm like, you would have read something like this at the funeral. But anyway, this is what he writes. He says, some shy professors forced to write about a time that's bound to come when my earthly life is done described my ultimate demise in lovely euphemistic words, invoking pleasant visions of burial rites with undertakers, friends, kinfolks, and pious pastors gathered round my flowery casket, eyes uplifted, breaking new semantic ground by not just saying I have passed on, joined my maker, or gone to the promised land, but stating the lamented fact in the best and gentlest terms that I, now dead, have recently reduced my level of participation. He published this in 1995. See, if I was Jason, if I was the grandson, I'd have read that and looked at Trump and said, my granddaddy was like, he not staying here watching you with this bullshit. Amen. And sat down. In other words, it's like, how you write that? In 1985, yeah, I've reduced my level of participation. I'm going to go to what I believe is next. Whether it's next or not ain't the point. The fact is you believe that. That's your way of knowing. And so that awful day will surely come. But sitting in front of that casket was a whole ass convict who's now about to be the president of the United States again, going to pardon all of the people in the Hillbilly Horde who broke all the laws. But then the law, can you really break a law in a lawless society? And if you don't think it's a lawless society, you should read just a little bit more American history. The point is that he's sitting there and y'all acting, everybody but Karen Pence, like you're supposed to talk to him. Now, we're not going to engage in Politburo politician watching at this point, and I'm not going to go down that path. I just wanted to mark the moment of that funeral, of that ritual, to talk a little bit about the possibilities that we were talking about last week, and kind of clean up some of the stuff that came through in Bongi and the chats, and that let me say yes and acknowledge that and thank everybody for that, because this ongoing conversation is really a true value of what we do regularly here. And to tie it to the idea of a Pax Americana, an American peace. Is it a Pax or is it a Pax? You see, because this world house we should be trying to build that is symbolized by these South African firefighters coming to Canada a half dozen times, and these Mexican firefighters coming over this imaginary line to say, oh, it's okay for us to come over here to help you try to save your lives and your possessions, but not okay if we coming over here to work. Meanwhile, all the way across the continent, an orange clown, whatever has begun to eat his mind, continuing to chomp at it, didn't see Junior Varsity. Was Junior Varsity at the funeral? I mean, Dan Quayle was there. You saw Dan Quayle sitting back there, right? Because George Bush hit him on the head with the funeral program at one point. George Bush, like, he was having a good old time. Slapped Barack Obama in the stomach, hit his vice president on the head with it. Just kiki. Everybody seemed to forget that you started a whole ass war. I mean, I guess, you got to come through the theater. But again, I'm not going to engage in this Politburo work. But I didn't see Junior Varsity. Maybe he was there. I saw the MAGA Muppet. Didn't see Junior Varsity. Maybe he's somewhere brushing up on what he's going to do once they trigger that 25th Amendment. But the world house Dr. King talked about is imaginary until we make it something. So here now, an hour in, mindful of this commitment that we've made in 2025 to continue to be very committed to tying study to commentary. Let me mark one other intervention that someone put into the Imbangi and YouTube. It was indeed last week, 11 days ago now, the anniversary of the beginning of the pogrom of the slaughter in Rosewood, Florida. And I want to acknowledge that January the 1st. January 1st, also 1804, was the birth of the country we know as Haiti, Haitian Independence Day. In its current form. And that, let's see what I do with it. That is something I want to evoke again. And here we are. Evoke in a book that just came out. I just got this book this week. Professor Marlene Daut, who's professor of French and African diaspora studies at Yale University. Here's Professor Daut right here. This is a book. This is the second book she's published in the last few years. One is called An Intellectual History of Haitian Revolution, which is excellent. This is her book, and if you all are subscribers to Sirius or you were listening yesterday, you heard Lamont say this book's the size of a telephone book. How long would it take you to read it? I say, yeah, uninterrupted, a day probably. 600 some pages given the with the notes, and then that's uninterrupted time, because I'll just pick it up and won't put it down except to go to the bathroom, and I'm not even eating. But the point is this: it's called The First and Last King of Haiti. The Rise and Fall of Henri Christophe by Marlene Daut. And it's really about the brother who was born in Grenada in 1767, who entered battle, trained to be a soldier as a teenager, not in Haiti, not in Grenada, not anywhere in the Caribbean, but fighting to overthrow the British occupation of British North America by George Washington and his armies. The Battle of Savannah. This where, because remember, the Haitians fought in the so-called American Revolution to overthrow the British. The United States repaid the favor by effing with the Haitians from 1804 to now. White supremacy don't change. Pax Americana. George Bush talking about, I'm sorry, George Bush. Thinking about George Bush, because they're all the same in this regard, but a little bit more in terms of Donald Trump. Donald Trump talking about taking Greenland, going into Panama, turning Canada into the 51st state, reducing Mexico in some form, although Claudia Scheinbaum had a clapback that was brilliant. And this is what made me think about Pax Americana in the first place. Some of y'all know where I'm going with this in a moment. But this book talks about how, Henri Christophe then as an adult joins that revolution. We talk about Toussaint Louverture. We talk about Jean-Jacques Dessalines. The third of those three, the only king who pronounced himself a king, indeed imposing peace through this struggle, was Henri Christophe. And Christophe is often narrated by social structure narrators as a thug, as a tyrant, as an uneducated fool who was imposing his will on the oppressed Haitian blacks, black like him. Yeah. She's rewritten that. It's fast. I've just started the book. So, when we get out of here, I'm probably going to spend most of the day reading, because, she's really grappling with a complete rewrite, not only of Christophe, but on the concept of what Christophe was trying to do, what the Haitians were trying to do, and how they've been fucked with ever since. And so let me just read this. Slave revolutionary, traitor, king, and suicide. Henri Christophe was in his time popular and famous the world over, born in 1767 to an enslaved mother on the Caribbean island of Grenada. Christophe first fought to overthrow the British in North America before helping his fellow enslaved Africans in Saint Domingue, as Haiti was called, to gain their freedom from France. Yet in an incredible twist of fate, Christophe ended up fighting with Napoleon's forces against the very enslaved men and women he had once fought alongside. Later, reuniting with those he had betrayed, he offered to lead them and make himself their king, but it all came to a sudden and tragic end when Christophe, after 9 years of his rule as King Henri I, shot himself in the heart, some say with a silver bullet. Why did Christophe turn his back on Toussaint Louverture and the very revolution with which his name is so indelibly associated? How did it come to pass that Christophe found himself accused of participating in the plot to assassinate Haiti's first ruler, Jean-Jacques Dessalines? What caused Haiti to eventually split into two countries, one ruled by Christophe in the north, who made himself king, and the other led by President Alexander Pétion in the south? The first and last king of Haiti is a riveting story, not only of geopolitical clashes on a grand scale, but also of friendship and loyalty, treachery and betrayal, and heroism and strife in an era of revolutionary upheaval. John Clark says some stories ain't no good guy. That never deify political leaders. I don't care whether they're kings or presidents. Use them as points of entry to talk about the larger society. And the Jimmy Carter funeral, more than anything else, is a barometer of the illusion that there are people who are clustered together under a label like Haitian or American or US for that matter. You know, it's interesting because Edgar Mitchell, many people have heard this quote many times, but the astronaut Edgar Mitchell on Apollo 14, talking about viewing the Earth from space, you know, and saying that international politics looks so petty from space. And you know, his famous quote was, "You develop immediately, instantly, a global consciousness. The fire don't know no political boundaries." When we think of political leaders, we're typically using them as a point of entry to try to reflect on ourselves. And so we create hagiography, which is what I accuse myself of doing Monday night in office hours. And, you know, Russ was like, "No, you weren't really hagiographical. Hagiography is to create an illusory narrative where you airbrush all the bad stuff. That's never anything anybody has to worry about where I'm concerned. At the same time, it's not my instinct to go in the complete opposite direction." So there were people who were roundly slapping Jimmy Carter around. They're all evil. They're all the same. Look at them kikiing there. They're all the same. That is remarkably ignorant. And I'm not using ignorance as a pejorative. I'm using the word as a description of a condition that has been exacerbated with social media, with hot take, pretend as journalism, pronouncements. None of that. No, that's remarkably ignorant. You can't flatten the life of anybody. So you got to figure out how to strike that balance. And so I wanted to use the last king of Haiti and the acknowledgement that we've just passed Haitian Independence Day, which of course is the same day as the beginning of the Rosewood Pogrom, a century and 2 decades almost later. And by the way, in session 159, if you want to know more about Rosewood, this is the folks who brought it up and say, "You forgot." No, remember, we've been at this thing for 253 consecutive weeks. Go to 159 and look at the conversation around the Rosewood Foundation. Remember, that was when I was in Florida at the National Council for Black Studies, and it just come from a discussion with Lizzie Robinson Jenkins, who is part of the Rosewood Foundation. If you want to know more about it, go to www.rosewoodfoundation.com. Go back to 159 and look at that too, because we talked about a lot of stuff in here. So this is for the folks who are new to either space, particularly, who may not yet be in Nubian narrative. If I don't mention something, the first thing you might want to do is ask yourself, did he talk about it before? And I'm going to help, because when I've done it before, I will go back. We talked about Haitian Revolution so many times, I didn't pull the numbers on that. But I actually saw this book first in the new Barnes and Nobles that is out in Georgetown. was watching a video, an interview on PBS with James Taub, who runs Barnes and Nobles now. Came over from England, and he, Barnes and Nobles is a huge superstore. I didn't know him. I met him. We were in conversation a couple of times when he was on the board of the Children's Defense Fund. But the late Leonard Riggio, who ran Barnes and Nobles for many years, who was a great friend of the Children's Defense Fund, who through Barnes and Nobles donated the books that populate the Alex Haley Library on the campus of the Children's Defense Fund in Clinton, Tennessee, where I spent many a day and some all-nighters just up in the library, working, reading, thinking. Oh man. In my ideal imaginary, which will one day be reality, I'm saying this here in front of the world, that's going to be a campus. We're going to have a campus like that with a huge library with all this stuff and other stuff together, a physical place where people can come, and old folks and children and summer institutes and this kind of thing, because, we're going to have what some people might call a think tank, but it's not going to be Brookings. It's not going to be the Joint Center. It's not going to be anything under any responsibility to anybody except our common humanity as filtered through Africana. Oh, watch the world change at that moment. But I was at the Barnes and Nobles because Traub was talking in this interview about how you can't run these big box bookstores by putting all the independent bookstores out of business, because he worked at an independent bookstore. That's where he came from. He said, my strategy at Barnes and Nobles now is basically to let the staffs at the various Barnes and Nobles curate the stores, because people are going to come in there looking for a bestseller. But then they're going to stay and look at all the other books. And the books there need to be books that you can find other places that are kind of reflect true book people. And so I said, I'll take a spin. So I went out there after I went and saw my man, Joe, over at Joe Raza over at Bridge Street Books, which I always got to check in with Joe. Yeah. Then I said, let me go up the block here, check this place out. Of course, the first thing you see is a big poster for this book for James, because now the world knows about Percival Everett. Come for James, stay for Erasure, stay for I Am Not Sidney Poitier, stay for all the dozens of books that my man Percival Everett has written. That's how you curate a bookstore. Remember, you were talking yesterday, Lamont and I, we were on the air, and Mike was talking about, getting stuff off the internet and the importance in this research. First, it's not research, brother. Not what you talking about. That's social media stuff, not research. But we can talk about that another day. I said, but the value of in person is you go in the library looking for one book and you see all the other books you had no idea exist. You on the computer, you can say, sure, I can do a search and I can connect. Yeah, but there's the serendipity, which is why books, you see my books, some of them are organized with intent. Other things are just convenience, usage, or I need to read this, let me put it up. So if I just point back and say, for example, the Steve Biko book is next to one of the Sabukwe books because they knew each other, and I was talking about a couple of, then next to it, you got White Money, Black Power with Noelle Rooks, which is talking about how these white philanthropists and others tried to control Black studies. And next to it, External Mission, the ANC in Exile, 1960 to 1990, Ellis's book talking about how the ANC was operating during the last years of apartheid, coming into the coming out of the anti-apartheid movement into government outside of South Africa, which you see a South Africa theme. But if I go down a couple of others, you got Watkins' book, Literacy Work in the Reign of Human Capital, and Within the Realm of Possibility on African Universities, then Ebonics and Language Education by my man Clinton Crawford up in New York. But I'm saying that's going to spark, that sparks in my mind connections. There's no connection between that. Of course, there are always connections. You put things in conversation sometimes by serendipity, and that yields into another. He said, you know what? And now you got to do two things. One, you got to be in conversation with people to pull people from these various conversations, because some people are thinking about connections right now, even just me narrating those few titles. And the second thing is, if there's a connection that hasn't been teased out, that's where you plug that in. That's what you write about. That's what you're in conversation about. That is the definition of research. Not coming up with AI generated answers to questions you have. That's not, no. As Zora Hurston, who's got a new book out. You seen it, man, it's out. I'm waiting for it to come. Imagine that, still publishing. We'll call research poking and prying with a purpose. That was her definition. So again, thanks for that reminder about the Rosewood anniversary. It made me think about the last, first and last king of Haiti and the Haitian Independence Day, which was the first of um, January 1804. And then so I saw the book on Christophe. I knew it was coming out, but my first time physically seeing it was at Barnes Noble. I didn't get it from there because, again, support your Black bookstores. We got several hundred of them on the Knarrative website, including places like my mothership here in DC, of course, which is Sankofa. And of course, in Atlanta, think about Medu, and many of all the other bookstores. My man Mark Lamont Hill, Uncle Bobby's in Philly. We started naming them in Baltimore, of course. The great Everyone's Place, Baba Nati, who is also a publisher and distributor. All that stuff. We have these Black spaces. So at any rate, that curation of reading experiences is part of what we remind ourselves of week by week here, which is why I brought that book up as a point of entry. But in reflecting in this, it reminds us of the connections of literacy, right? Literacy, reading and thinking, the connection of literacy and engaging. And so, last week before, every week, but last week I'm thinking now because of Carter, I was moving fast. We all moving fast, making pronouncements, people, and that's why I don't take hot takes seriously. Social media, people got stuff to say, oh, look at them laughing. That means, okay, that's a hot take. That is absolutely worthless, except as a point of entry to say, this is a teachable moment. This is what you don't do, you see. But I will just use one other mention, although, well, let me do a little bit more about the funeral ritual, not that face watching, but what happened after, because we know that watching it, you can be seduced by social structure theater. Because as you remember now, and I want to just now, as I level set, as I already did that, I want to introduce again for reiteration, the thing that we'll be talking about next week in Claflin, which is those conceptual categories that are the foundation of our Africana studies approach. This isn't the study of interesting Black stuff. It is using a methodology, a lens to interpret, to understand, to research, to gain deeper connection with reality, with existence through the lens of Africana. So that means that social structure or governance formations, all of them have ways of knowing, cultural meaning making, science and technology applications, movement and memory. They all exist in all human formations, whether you're talking about a larger social structure or a more intimate governance formation. And it's interesting to see in the social structure that we call the United States of America, or what people like the brain-addled Donald Trump or the MAGA Mike Johnson or the Christian soldier Sam Alito might think of perhaps as Pax Americana. It was interesting to see at these moments of ritual where we're trying to, create these binding narratives, how they narrate this idea of this illusion of a we, of a community and this commitment, you see? So watching the funeral ritual in DC, a lot of people watch parts of it. I watched all of it and then watched all of the funeral in Plains. No, in Plains at Maranatha Baptist Church. The one speaking presence that I was particularly trained on was the brother, the pastor. Although it was also interesting to see the kind of, multicultural, rainbow hue, non-white contingent of folks, whether it be the military people carrying the casket, whether it be Judy Malana, M-A-L-A-N-A, Judy Malana, a Filipina who is also a Navy chaplain. So we say, who is that Asian lady who's walking in front of the casket with the sash on, with the cross on it? That was the Navy chaplain, Judy Malana. But interestingly enough, the pastor, former pastor now of Maranatha Baptist Church, where Jimmy Carter and Rosalind Carter went to church after they left Plains Baptist, which is where he grew up. He was born and raised in that church, but they left it because in the 70s, they voted not to allow Black families to be members of the church. So the Carters and some other people left, and that's where you see Maranatha come from. But the pastor there now is a woman, Ashley Gunthus, who sometimes gives the sermons there barefoot. That's driving some of these old school Southern Baptists wild. I wish I were in the land of cotton. Old times there and not forgotten. But The immediate past pastor, who was the first black pastor of Maranatha, of course, maybe first and last, like the first and last king of Haiti, who knows? Because when I looked at that funeral in Plains, I'm looking at this audience in this church and I'm counting very few black people. I'm like, how white this audience is in a place that Andrew Young just told you when Jimmy Carter was raised was 3/4 black. Fascinating to see that narrative play out, because in this church is friends and what's friends and family. Okay. And but anyway, it was interesting because the pastor, Tony Loudon, who spoke at the National Cathedral, the black man, also spoke at Plains. And he talked about, don't let this country fall apart, let peace prevail. You should have said that in DC, Ralph. Not that what you said in Plains wasn't beautiful, but you should have said that. Not that what you said in the National Cathedral wasn't beautiful. A little bit more of that at the National Cathedral would have been interesting, because a fraction of the people who watched the funeral in the National Cathedral continued into Plains that night. Very interesting. But this unilateral disarmament of doing deeper thinking continues. Facebook getting rid of fact checkers, Amazon them getting rid of DEI programs. We know that. Facebook. Come on, Mark, baby. Moving your units from Texas to Texas from California. That ain't gonna save you. To ensure, as he says, that no bias exists among employees' choices who are dealing with facts. You ain't dealing with facts, Zuck. And we're not gonna get zucked. You scrap your fact checking program, no problem. Saying that you move from California to Texas, where there's less concern about the bias of our teams. I'm not gonna argue with you about more or less concerns, because we got narrative in Nubia. Come to death row. No, I'm sorry. I shouldn't do that. Let me say that more accurately. Come from death row. We leaving death row. We coming to life row. We coming in the governance formation of our people. You understand? We're not coming to death row. So if you don't want your racist felon president all up in the videos, if you don't want your racist MAGA muppet passing meaningless resolutions while the world burns, come from death row. Come on over here into the governance formation. And I'll tell you one book that I will have at some point when somebody give it to me, and then I'm going to take it straight to storage. No, that's not true. Pause. Let me be very thoughtful about this, what I'm about to say next. I will devote an hour maybe to going through it. That will be Jeff Bezos' book on Melania Trump. I'm sorry. Jeff Bezos' documentary on Melania Trump. I know it's not him personally, although of course it is him personally too. It's Amazon doing a documentary on Melania Trump. Sure, why not? What is the lesson to be learned from all of this? Well, the intensifying inequities, as we said as we began, in the society, rich, poor, white, non-white. These intensifying inequities are pushing us toward resolution. It's going to have to be resolved. Now, it ain't going to be resolved in just one way. It's going to be some naked ass brawling in the streets, because y'all effing around and finding out now. Everybody not putting up with this, friends. Then there's going to be some institution building that is empowered and exacerbated and increased exponentially as a result. Let me pause there, because all of those words were correctly used, but when you use them in sequence like that, in a short order like that, you begin to sound like Stephen A. Smith, who often doesn't quite use them quite as accurately. And I don't want that rhythm to be mistaken for the content behind it. So when you see this pushing, this is the point I'm trying to make. When you see this pushing toward people having to make a choice, some of these choices are going to enhance independent spaces like the one we're in right now, that is balanced between the space we don't completely control, like YouTube, and the one we do, like Knarrative and Nubia. So these things are being exacerbated. The confrontations are continuing, and they are doing that as the law is unmasked. The law is unmasked. These rising inequities, which are causing people to make different choices. All these cats that were in the military who are now attacking the state, whether it be in Vegas, New Orleans, going back a generation, Oklahoma City. Tim McVeigh was a military veteran. That's one way to respond to these inequities. Not the one we choose, the one we condemn: loss of life, destruction, this kind of thing. But it is a choice that is part of the revelation that stakes is high, as De La Soul would say. In fact, there's another book that just came out. I started reading this the other day too. Eric Lawson's book, The Demon of Unrest, a saga of murder, heartbreak, and heroism at the dawn of the Civil War. The whole thing is built around Fort Sumter. Those of you down there in the Carolinas know about Fort Sumter. It's very interesting, this book. And this guy, he's the one who wrote Devil in the White City. But it's interesting because he has a set of 3 epigraphs, framing quotes for the whole book. This is a letter from Arthur Perrineau Hayne to James Buchanan, President of the United States, December 22nd, 1860. He says, slavery with us is no abstraction. This is a Southerner, a kind of intellectual and ancestor of the MAGA Muppet and the Orange Clown, Mr. Discharge. Slavery with us is no abstraction, but a great and vital fact. Without it, our every comfort will be taken from us. Our wives, our children made unhappy. Education, the light of knowledge, all lost. And our people ruined forever. Nothing short of separation from the Union can save us. That's 1860. So their idea of Pax Americana, their idea, which is the great-grandparent of MAGA, is not to take control of the whole federal apparatus, but to leave the Union. He's writing about South Carolina here through the lens of Sumter, which comes into, he says, as I was writing this book, I started reading the first part of it. He said, as I was writing this book, in fact, I shouldn't even, let me see if I can find the page in the next 5 seconds, if I can. Here we go. He says, I was well into my research on the saga of Fort Sumter and the advent of the American Civil War when the events of January 6, 2021 took place. As I watched the Capitol assault unfold on camera, I had the eerie feeling that present and past had merged. It is unsettling that in 1861, 2 of the greatest moments of national dread centered on the certification of the Electoral College vote and the presidential inauguration. I was appalled by the attack, but also riveted. I realized that the anxiety, anger, and astonishment that I felt would certainly have been experienced in 1860 to 1861 by vast numbers of Americans. With this in mind, I set out to try to capture the real suspense of those long ago months when the country lurched forward toward catastrophe, propelled by hubris, duplicity, false honor, and an unsatisfiable craving on the part of certain key actors for personal attention and affirmation. Sound familiar? Last sentence. Many voices at the time of Sumter warned of civil war, but few had an inkling of what that might truly mean. Certainly none would have believed that any such war could take the lives of 750,000 Americans. Now, I read that for a reason. He said, I'm writing this about the Civil War. I'm looking at the hillbilly horde, as I'm calling them, and then I realized it's the same thing in many ways. So let me try to write a book as if the person reading it doesn't know what's going to happen next, so we can get a little bit closer. That's why you study, because there are rhythms, but you got to understand those rhythms have to be understood in reverse order, because when the people were living the stuff that we now call memory, they didn't know what was going to happen. But if you study how they reacted, you can predict what's going to happen next. It's about to be blood. Margaret Walker said, let a bloody piece be written in the sky, because at some point, you get to the point where you're not going to take your foot off. Or you're going to take all my Social Security and give it to the white. You're going to now allow private equity to have control of my pension in a bigger way, and my retirement. That's what was on the front pages of the Financial Times earlier this week. You wait, hold on. You're going to what? Oh, you know what? What you doing? I'm going to get this gun. No, I believe in the Second Amendment too. At first I was saying gun control, but I'm glad y'all didn't pass no gun control laws. Oh, it'd be like the Panthers under Ronald Wilson Reagan when the California legislature passed gun control fast as hell when the Panthers showed up in the damn legislature. No, there will be no laws passed. There's an arbitrariness of law. Y'all don't believe in the law. Now, finally, I get it. You never believed in it. So I don't believe in it either. The law unmasked. Oh, wait a minute. You convicted and no consequences? What did you call it, my friend? Unconditional discharge? F it then. It don't matter. The TikTok oral arguments, you're going to ban it because you're trying to buy it? See, this isn't about banning TikTok and protecting children. This is about forcing the Chinese to sell. And then you keep it going, because if nothing else from this election cycle, we have learned that you want social media because it keeps the people stupid. It keeps them ignorant. And now y'all mad. They all over social media mad at the handmaid, mad at Amy Coney Barrett, because her and John Roberts have realized, John Roberts, who is the author of not Girls Going Wild, but Courts Going Wild, 2010, Citizens United. John Roberts is like, did I do that? Yeah, you broke it, baby. It was already teetering, but you pushed it over the edge with that First Amendment. And now you can't rein it in. So when Trump, talking to his friend, the Christian soldier, Alito, earlier in the week, pretending they ain't talking about what's coming up, which is what the decision to say whether or not he could be sentenced at all, the Supreme Court decides within the space of a day in a one paragraph, Trump, let the system play out. You can appeal, which means we get another bite at this. And they mad on social media because two of the white nationalists, Comey Barrett and Roberts, who are terrified, particularly Roberts, of the fact that they done tore up any illusion of institutional authority with the Supreme Court, sided with Sotomayor, Ketanji Onyeka Brown Jackson, and our sister, our sister Sotomayor and Ketanji Brown Jackson, also Elena Kagan. So Roberts and Comey Barrett go with them, and people say Supreme Court came to its senses. Read the paragraph. The paragraph says you can still appeal, so there's really nothing to be bothered. And it's only two sentences I'm concerned about. The second sentence in the paragraph, the last sentence in the paragraph, Supreme Court writes in their small rationalization for why they said, no, you can be sentenced, that the judge in New York, Marchand, has already said it's going to be nothing. Damn, they said it. All you got to do is read. But that's one thing. That's where everybody's focused. They ain't even focused on the paragraph. They're saying, oh, the Supreme Court came to a sensus. No, fool. It was 5-4, meaning what? 1, 2, 3, 4. Jenny Thomas's boy toy, owned by Harlan Crow, Clarence Thomas, the Christian soldier, Alito, Beer Kavanaugh, and McConnell Gorsuch. They had 4 votes to say, stop it. That's what people should be doing. Now, what happens? We pray for the health of them 3 that are going to be always on the side of the angels until they not, but they ain't going to talk about that because we're going to get into the discussion of the law today. I'm saying that, yeah, very easily, this is a fragile piece, and it's still got to play out because it's going to come back because they are going to appeal. In North Carolina, we saw a local example of that because they're trying to steal a Supreme Court seat on the North Carolina Supreme Court as we speak, and they have agreed to hear the case. North Carolina Supreme Court is going to decide whether or not somebody actually won an election they won by several hundred votes. The Democrat who was on the Supreme Court of North Carolina, who won the election, the Republicans is like, no, we want 60,000 of the votes thrown away. And they're like, okay, we'll hear it. Oh, they got the numbers to uphold throwing away the votes. So, Greg Palast is somewhere tearing his hair out right now, and I'm sure at some point he's going to be in conversation again with you, Karen. But the whole idea that, Palast tried to tell us the story of the 2024 election and now the story of 2025 is they try to steal this court seat because, see, there are 3 Republicans coming off the court and standing for election in 2028. And between 2028 and 2025, there are other elections in the North Carolina Supreme Court. And ultimately, there's a redistricting set to take place after 2028. And that's what they're really fighting on because the Democrats broke the back of the supermajority in North Carolina, and they're creeping back into electoral competition and being able to claw back some notion, some semblance of power. And so they're terrified in North Carolina. This is like the guy, Eric Lawson is watching this stuff saying, this is what happened in the 1860s and 1861. So there's no outlying thing when you start dealing with New Orleans or with Nevada. It's not outlying. If you know the history, this is what happens next. So this week, as I was thinking about what we would talk about today, as I kind of now turn toward home for today, and y'all come on in on Monday night on Office Hours because the homework, of course, is John Wright's essay, which has been posted now for several weeks, Intellectual Life. That's what we're dealing with in terms of ways of knowing on Monday night. School started last week. Shout out to the students in my Howard University law class, Race, Law, and Change, Law 689. Another brilliant group of students, including 2 who were on Bourbon Street, blew my mind, who were on. One young brother was there he and his boys left about an hour before the slaughter. And one young sister, law student, 3rd-year law student, She and her friend were down there. They went to school in Georgia. They root for the University of Georgia, and they were there to go to the Sugar Bowl the next day. They left 30 minutes before the guy plowed into Bourbon Street. Just like those fires, which affect us all, if not directly, indirectly. Certainly, these conditions face us all. So yeah, that started this week. And this week, my introduction to African American Studies class, my hip hop class, where God knows we're gonna have to have this conversation about who started hip hop. But fortunately, we started by reading. So a lot of this social media beef is going to evaporate because they're going to be studying. That starts this week. But on Monday night, the centering work, the foundational work, the community work, the intro class continues. We're doing intellectual life. We're in the third conceptual category, ways of knowing. Very important work. The first of several texts we'll be reading together in that conceptual category. And parents, oh, by the way, come on, son, what I do with it is here because I was so happy that it got here. Let me see. Oh, here we are. Ha ha. Yep, came in the mail. Soundtrack to a coup d'etat. We're going to be scheduling Anubia and Refill to watch this. Oh man, this is the thing right here. Soundtrack to the coup d'etat. Talk about the United States and the limits of the government. As I kind of wind this up, I want to tie some things together as we finish. Remember, this week's theme is Pax or Pox, the fragility of the world house. And as the United States is in the middle, and you'll see this when you read the description for this week underneath here. And make sure you all subscribe to the channel. It's important to subscribe to the channel. I'm watching some of the things that Larry is doing on her channel and making some synergies. And I'm like, this is how you do it. You bring this stuff together.
She's brilliant.
She absolutely is brilliant. Absolutely. And, for me, I see my man, Mark Lamont Hill, doing some stuff, and I realize he got a staff. And unlike Karen Hunter, who has a staff of like interns and a handful of other people, but when you got a staff, it's incredible. I know Larry is doing a lot on her own. I'm thinking, I should take the time and learn. So this is some very important synergy. But y'all hit that like, subscribe, and share on the YouTube side. It's important. Like I say, we want to freak the algorithm to the degree it could be freaked, because again, Musk and Zuckerberg and these cats, these plutocrats and tech moguls, they are in the midst of a propaganda and disinformation war, attempting to expand their reach. They don't want to get rid of TikTok. They want to own it. And they're harnessing the technology for one word and one concept: profit. They don't give a damn. But as a lot of millionaires and celebrities are finding out, when fire touched them, unfortunately, like it touches us all, like death the same night that awaits us all, it's not going to protect you. The American empire continues to act as if it is going to be unchecked, and it's realizing its worst nationalist and jingoistic impulses, because you got political opportunists like Donald Trump and hangers on everywhere from Melania Trump to Donald Trump Jr. and everyone else. They are engaged in that at the highest level. Jimmy Carter was not a political opportunist. He was a realist. He went as racist as he needed to get to be elected the governor of Georgia. And people are saying he shouldn't have done that. Yeah, he wouldn't have been the governor of Georgia. And then stood on the steps at the inauguration and said the time for racial hatred and separation is over. And the hillbillies behind him, if you ever watch that, like, what just happened? Shit, I thought I was in the land of cotton. World times there, not forgotten. Jimmy Carter. Yeah, I remember them that read my book an hour before daylight. I was raised by black people once, and Miss Lillian let them in the house. My daddy wouldn't, but she did. And what the hell? Oh yeah, I got y'all, but I am not stupid. I know some of y'all got to be tricked. I'm engaged in what Mariba Kelsey it calls, in an African sense, African war for peace. Yeah, I'm going to fight a war in another context, but I'm going somewhere with it. My peace, however, must be achieved, as he said, without firing a single shot. Yeah, but you did give money to prop up Joseph Savimbi in Angola, and you did undermine the work that was doing in Central America and gave birth to what eventually became, Ronald Wilson Reagan, the gladiator invader of Grenada, and his Iran-Contra scandal and all that stuff. Y'all remember Oliver North and all them boys. But some of the roots of that are in Jimmy Carter. And Carter could say, and Carter defenders would say, and I agree with them part of the way, it wasn't me. It was the fact that I listened to Brzezinski. Yeah, you did listen to Joe's father-in-law and Mika's daddy. Maybe you shouldn't have. But the point is this: there are limits to that. And so the American empire does remain unchecked, but it is teetering. And these times demand serious, accessible intellectual work like what we're doing, what we have been doing, and what we commit to do even better and more clearly, collectively. But instead, folks are, as I write in the description this week, which is what I'm going through when you read it for yourself, which is why I'm doing this, because some of that was missed maybe last week, as I said on office hours last Monday night. But I'm saying here because we got the YouTube folk in who some people may have thought that I somehow sane washed Jimmy Carter. No, and they're all the same, which is absolutely incorrect. And we can talk about that anytime, including in office hours. Come on in, let's talk about it. But we're surrendering to the lazy pull of social media, leaving us unable to distinguish between deep research and truth telling, like James Lewin, the late James Lewin, who wrote the book, maybe I know, Lies My Teacher Told Me. Well, I resisted because I already put in to get The Last King of Haiti, The Rise and Fall of Henri Christophe. But I did get this book because it was on such a deep discount and sale that I went on and picked it up. This is a book. This is what you can call polemic, cherry-picked narrative polemic by, I think it's a black dude, although, I got to look him up. I saw a couple of speeches he did in the debate he did. It's Wilford Riley. I'm looking for Wilford Riley. Wilford Riley is at Kentucky State University. Go Thoroughbreds, HBCU. He done wrote a book called Lies My Liberal Teacher Told Me. So I'm looking at this book and I'm saying, should I spend $3-4 on this book? And the answer for me is almost always going to be yes. So here's the table of contents. Lie number 1, brutal true slavery was virtually unique to America and the West. Lie number 2, the Red Scare was a moral panic that taught no commies. I'm doing that in this voice, not only because I'm mocking the hillbilly horde, but also he kind of talked like that. That Appalachian South. I know the tongue. I speak the tongue. I was raised in the tongue. Lie 3, Native Americans were peaceful people who spent all day dancing. Who's saying that? Come on, Will. Come on, Professor. Come on, Professor Riley. Lie 4, hippies were the good guys. The sexual revolution was great for women, and the Vietnam War was unpopular and pointless. Lie number 5, the founders counted slaves as 3/5 of a person, and the only victims of lynching were black. I won't go through the rest of the lies my liberal teacher told me, because anybody who has any sense knows that it wasn't 3/5 of a person. But what he's doing is establishing straw women, straw men, straw people so he could attack. And when you look at who endorsed the book on the back, you're talking about Ben Shapiro. Wilford Riley is the indispensable man in today's politics. Brash, fearless, hilarious, and insightful. He frustrates his enemies as he battles with hard realities. Lies my liberal teacher told me is a vital work, and everyone interested in politics should have a copy on the bookshelf. I'm not telling anybody to buy this book. I bought it, but I bought it because I have to buy it. And then I could do what I'm doing right now, which is tell y'all, don't be fooled. Now, the point. If you want to buy it, sure. But my point is this. This is a condition we're facing, because there'll be somebody with that little floating head thing that irritates the hell out of me when somebody send me a TikTok and they got the stuff in the back and then you see the flood and they'll flash that book up and people say, let me write that down. I need to read that. No. That's the lazy pull of social media and an obsession with simplistic narratives. But this is playing out globally. News this week from Syria as they try to form a government, and the United States and the European Union are lifting bans on groups that they call terrorists yesterday. And now they're like, well, hold on, they in charge? Okay, we need to unban them so we can talk with them. See, power does that, has that kind of impact. They're fighting over the curriculum in the schools in Syria now. They want to get rid of Assad as a hero, the former guy, the dictator. They say, okay, well, the former guy, Bashir Assad. But they're also going now to look at, what about gender? How are we dealing with you? Oh, wait, hold on. We don't want that. So why I'm raising that is because these curriculum debates aren't just in the United States, because what they really reveal is a struggle over shaping minds and controlling knowledge, because people who are not doing research, people who are not being trained to think critically, like the young people who are watching right now, who are in conversation. I want more of you all to comment in the Mbangi, to add your voices to our conversation, because I read those comments. And, this is where we reach the question of how education influenced the society. And we ask the question, is it for enlightenment or is it for power? Well, the answer is yes. It's for both. It should be for both. Nobody, in terms of the American presidency, as far as I would say, I don't think anybody was more intellectually capable than James Earl Carter, from what I can discern. I don't care what you're talking about Thomas Jefferson. I don't talk about the autodidact Abraham Lincoln. I don't care whether you're talking about John Kennedy, who I think is more hagiographical than anything in terms of his intellect. I don't think I'm not going to say anything about Obama. I don't think it's, whether it's Barack Obama or Bill Clinton. Carter. I was watching an interview Jimmy Carter did with Oprah Winfrey, and then another one where somebody came to his office in Plains, and he's showing off this table that he did. He said, I get up, I read the New York Times, Washington Post, I read the Israeli papers. It's very interesting. And then I go on, I do it. And then, I work on a book or whatever I'm working on, you know what I'm saying? And then if I get bored, I go out in the garage and I start doing some woodwork. I made this table. You made this? He said, oh, yeah. We pulled up this stump. Most of it was underground, but the top part went. And this beautiful table, he said, yeah, this was hard because I did woodworking, but then I took another class. I learned. And I'm like, yeah, I've been woodworking since a child. But then I did this. And what the hell? He said, yeah, this one is tough. This took me like 3 weeks. Anyway, so I don't know if there's anybody that's more. But when you start talking about the idea of the world house and building a world house and the role of education, what we're doing, what we're trying to do, what we're committed to doing is exposing ourselves to different ways of thinking, to competing ways of thinking, to complicated ways of thinking, whether it be Jimmy Carter or Henri Christophe, that will allow us to equip ourselves to be what John Henry Clark would say is responsible wielders of power. By the way, I'll be in South Carolina next week, within the weekend after that, in Columbus, Georgia, at George Washington Carver High School for the ASCAC Southern Regional Conference. And that's going to be streaming as well as in person. But we're looking forward to that because we're celebrating the 110th birthday of John Henry Clark, January 1st, 1915, January 1st, 1804, of course, the Haitian Revolution, January 1st, 1920, I think, too, the slaughters in Rosewood began January 1st. There are other things as well. But we're staring finally into the week of Martin Luther King's birthday. The 15th is the true date. So by next week on the 19th, that morning we'll be here, and then I'll go into what Kat and them have lined up for us to be in conversation with at Claflin. So next week, look for us from Claflin in our, I guess, initial deliberate foray. Black History Month is every month of the year. But does our education enlighten us? Does it complicate our understanding of a world that's growing increasingly more disconnected? Because, Dr. King had a vision of a world house that we read about, we talked about in Narrative, in Nubia, when we read Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community, that chapter in that book on the world house. Does that vision seem increasingly distant because it's been replaced by a virtual reality, which is manipulated by forces spreading influence at any cost? Bezos, Zuckerberg, them cats got us thinking we're all connected, but we're all really siloed. We're narrating to ourselves. While this existential threat of global warming, no longer abstract, hasn't been abstract for quite some time. These weather events, like what's going on in LA right now, serving as harsh reminders of the consequences of environmental neglect. The smoke is clouding our skies, and we're left to ask, how do we fight the overwhelming tide of manipulation, racism, monopoly capitalism? How do we fight nationalism and climate destruction? When a guy is saying, I'm going to take over the Panama Canal, take Greenland, I'm going to reduce Canada to the 51st state. What about Mexico? Claudia Sheinbaum is like, hold your rate. I like the concept of Mexican America. That's even better. Look at this old map. Because your Pax Americana, your American peace, like the British peace, Pax Britannica, like the Roman peace, Pax Romana, which Gladiator 2, if you watch that movie, and certainly Denzel Washington's role, reminds you that all empire building ultimately is resolved at the center of the attempt by straight subterfuge and violence, and attempts to clutch for power, as that man from White Plains said, power. As that man from Mount Vernon, New York says, I want power. Thank you for not pronouncing any of that work in a British accent. But as Denzel Washington has said many times, I'm not from England, and I don't see why we have to use that accent when we're talking about Romans. I'm from New York. I need power. But that's the same narrative. Pax Romana, Pax Britannica, Pax Britannica, Pax Americana. Claudia Sheinbaum is like, stop it, chief. It's Pax Americana. Since you want to use Latin, let me talk about a Mexican America. Because guess what? As those firefighters come over that fake border that one day used to be Mexico, if you look at the map she showed this week in Mexico City, we ain't even coming over a border. Don't be wrong. The real test finally, the real test is whether we can rise above all this noise, the propaganda, the ego, the division, to see each other in a shared human identity, a shared human community. Like that astronaut from Apollo 14 saw the earth from the moon and said, I had immediately a global consciousness. Or as Martin Luther King, whose birthday is the 15th, would say, we are part of the world house. Because if we can do that, we can confront these challenges. We can confront the challenges of a better education, climate change, unchecked power, and maybe create a future where we're more than just a bunch of divided people trying to clutch for our own naked individual selfish interests. Stop.
Mm. As you were talking, I thought about why I didn't want to be on that panel. And it's this, the Democrats need to do this, the Republicans need to do that. You holding up that book, liberal, all of these titles, they don't matter. We're not in a Democrat or Republican space. This is not liberals versus conservatives. We're talking about humanity versus inhumanity. And it's really that simple. And if we can't start and finish our conversations in that, because this is not a political partisan space that we're in right now, what we're seeing play out globally, and it's global, right? Mm-hmm. To your point, this is, do you care about people or do you care about power and money?
That's right.
You're going to center human beings. And Jimmy Carter had the highest IQ of anyone that ever held that office. And one of the stories that his son told was when he was failing Latin. And Jimmy Carter took the book and learned Latin over their Christmas holiday, came back and taught it to him, and he ended up getting an A. I think about that. What you do here, it's one thing. You're going to read the book so that we don't have to, but you're going to come back and teach us so that we know. And that's why we have to be pristine and we have to be vigilant. And that's why I'm not leaving Twitter or any place else, because we're not there checking these people.
That's right.
100 years from now, that's going to be the narrative. That's going to be the story. If we're not holding up those books and saying what's wrong, and we're not challenging people who are out here saying bad things and wrong things and hurting us, then that's going to be the prevailing thought. And we can't let them win that. No. They don't get that real estate, and they don't get us. So
they don't. They don't. I'm glad you raised that, Prof. And we are finished. There were a couple of dates I wanted to mention because, of course, the so-called Divine Nine, Alpha's birthday was December the 4th, of course. But this week, the Sigmas and Kappas, the so-called Divine Nine, of course, coming up between now and when we see each other again. On the 19th, you got Alpha Kappa Alpha the 15th, you got Delta Sigma Theta on the 13th, and you got Zeta Phi Beta the 16th. But I'm raising now that to say that these Divine Nine organizations are just formations that it's not about the boule and the petty bourgeois Negroes. It's about, as you say, trying to change things. And you raised that in the conversation that I saw. You said, no, it's not about Democrat or Republican. It's our common humanity. And that's a very powerful lesson that has to sink into our deepest consciousness. It's going to be hard because there are going to be people who say me too and who immediately go to their corners. But no, you got to show it with your walk. And you do. You do. And the final thing is, again, I know I'm going back in the classroom next week. I know a bunch of 18, 19, 20-year-olds going to say, Dr. Carr, did you see this TikTok with Fat Joe? Did you see this over here with Lord Jamar and who started hip hop? And I'm going to remind them next week that this Saturday we spend in community in the real grounding space where we do the classroom work and education work, that it was the 11th of January 11th, 1879, that marked the beginning of the Anglo-Zulu War. The British had an empire. They were trying to consolidate it. Remember, they said the sun never set on the British Empire. This is Britannica. And they want to take over everything. So now they're in South Africa. They're going to suppress the Zulu. And Setsueto was the king. Setsueto fought back against them. And I won't go into that. I'll just say that because it's the 11th, I'm bringing it up. But remember that those battles, which then, in terms of movement and memory through a social structure that we didn't start, who's used us racially, movies were made. One of them called Zulu, with Michael Caine, who some people only know because he played Alfred in Batman trilogy, right? But that movie captured the imagination of a young man in New York who then created a whole movement coming out of the Black Spades, Baby Bam, create a whole movement based on those movies called the Zulu Nation. Now I'm saying today is the anniversary of the war that was in the movie that this young boy saw, who said, I'm gonna keep that with me, regardless of what you think about Bambaataa or not, the Zulu nation. And we arguing over where hip-hop started in Africa, friends. Its modality, its cultural meaning making, even its movement and memory, because the Black Spades, if you listen to the Herculoids in their song dedicated to Bambaataa, he said, y'all listen, I'm gonna tell you how the Black Spades became the Zulu nation. The point is that those guys were banging in the streets, Blacks, Puerto Ricans, Dominicans, they came together to solve community problems. The dancing and the music came after the organizing. We're not gonna fight the more we know. So stay off of social media. And let me stop there on the day.
No, don't stop, because instead of battling, who started what, how about you create the art that will inform the next generation to do the thing, because art created that. Art made someone inspired to do that. And as you're talking about the Divine Nine, each of these organizations could take a thing. Take a thing that we need in our community and make that your mission this year. Make that your mission over the next 10 years. NAACP, Urban League, all of the folk that are getting that need our support. How about you take a thing? Not bury an N word. How about we end sundown towns? Take a thing. Ooh. And let's do something. Tired of talking.
You know what? You put phrases. I mean, everything. I could see that on a shirt. I could see that at the beginning of a position paper. I could see that on the business. Both those. Make that your thing. And I love that. Take a thing. Take a thing. And then some of the things could be on the back. Take a thing. Make that your thing. I love that. Yes.
Too many. We have too many. We have too many resources to be in this position. So never again. Let's make that a thing. I love you.
I love you too.
And I thank you for leaving us with this.
Don't you just love these? Look at that.
So beautiful. So beautiful.
Okay, we stop there. Love you too.
Colonial.